Willkommen in einem neuen video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 63 of my game system design series. In this video I'll investigate a possible card-based ad hoc scenario generating system for ancient figure gaming. While investigating optimal ad hoc scenario systems for Napoleonics, World War II and Cold War figure games, I discovered the best mechanism was to use a card-based approach, which allowed you to bring in reinforcements at a later point in the game at a lower points value. The cards also include a host of special events, tactics, or potential orders. This system works surprisingly well for those periods, as a good game involves forces arriving at different points in the game, as well as the ability to conduct flank attacks. However, for ancients, it does not really work as well. Most ancient battles involved both armies deploying and then engaging in combat. It was rare for an army to take to the field until all its reinforcements had arrived, so it's rare for reinforcements to arrive during a battle. This did occur, but was rare and rarely considered a large force, so typically was not a major factor, although when it did occur it could have a significant morale impact. This conclusion made me thinking if a card-based system would even work for ancients, but my ancient comrades or opponents insisted I try, so I tried. The rules I'm using for this video is a figure game version of the SPI pre-stag board games using DBMM troop types and point systems. Because of this, I decided to see if there was anything in the DBMM rules book I could use. The stratagems stuck out, so I decided to investigate these in more detail. Within DBMM, a player can use points to purchase up to 5 stratagems. The system of using points for stratagems does work, but I found it results in their use being rather rare, unless the player was very experienced. I used a similar system before I adopted a card-based system, and now feel a better way to restrict the use of stratagem is a VP impact rather than the points cost. This is, of course, a personal preference issue, but when you play a historical scenario, most special abilities or events have an impact on the victory points, as the force mixes are fixed and cannot be altered. Thus, Hannibal will be able to hide a force at Trebeka, which affects the battle, and the victory points are adjusted accordingly. Other examples could be objectives, with a player getting so many VPs for taking objective, killing the enemy CNC, and so on. As my primary interest, background, and normal preference is historical battles or recreating them, I normally prefer special abilities, objectives, and events to have a VP impact rather than upfront points impact, because that's the way you construct or build historical scenarios. Saying that, there is no reason why a player could not use the point system for special abilities, objectives, and events. It's really basically a player preference. Going back to DBMM, looking at the stratagems, I noticed most could easily be converted into a card-based system with minimal effort. Let's look at them in more detail. Scouting is simple. It simply negates the impacts of possibly other stratagems. Guides is a bit more difficult to simulate, but this could allow a player to negate the impact of terrain. Betrayal would allow a player to negate the effect of fortification. Changing deployments was more difficult, but in the end a simple solution was to allow the player to swap a number of elements when the enemy comes within a certain distance of those elements or the army. For flank attacks, I used 2 cards, left flank and right flank. To compensate for the elements not being on the playing area, depending on when they arrive, they get extra elements. Thus, if it arrives in Q3 of the game, or the halfway point of a game, 2 elements get an extra 3rd element added. This is much simpler, or a much simpler system than my points-based system, which I use for Napoleonics, World War II and Cold War, but I discovered this tends to suit ancient gaming much better. Exaggerated army size can be reflected by the use of dummy elements. These are real elements, but the owning player notes they are dummies secretly, and when the element gets too close, they're simply removed. False reinforcements also require dummy elements, which arrive as if they were reinforcements, but are removed when they get close to the enemy. Disguise troops was a bit more difficult, but in the end I just allowed a player to swap one element when the enemy gets too close to a particular element. Hidden obstacles allow the player to deploy obstacles as soon as enemy elements get close enough. Delaying battle was another difficult one, and in this case it removed the first quarter of a game, starting the game in the second quarter. This means the game is shorter and combined with reinforcements could be rather useful as a result. Concealed command allows a player to keep part of the army off the playing area, but once the enemy moves within a certain distance of the centre line, they are immediately deployed. I was unable to think of something for unusual troops and fainted flight. For ambush, a small number of troops would be deployed as soon as an enemy moves within a certain distance of woods. I did, in addition to the normal DBMM stratagems, added a reinforcement cards. This allows a player to receive reinforcements in a battle. It works the same as a flank attack, but the forces arrive on the friendly player edge. I also added Force March, which allows a player to increase the movement allowance of a number of elements. I added Hidden Troops, which allows for the deployment of 24 element markers, half of which are dummies. I also added an initiative card, giving a player an extra movement phase. I also added the Skirmish screen, which negates the Scout card. I added a loyalty card which negates unreliability for allied generals. I also included an assassin card which distracts an enemy sub-commander or general for one game turn. To end the special events, I added a sub-general superior and inferior card, allowing a player to upgrade or downgrade a sub-general. I'm not quite sure if this is actually required because you can upgrade or downgrade sub-generals using the standard DBMM point system, which I suspect in the end is probably the best option. But nonetheless, if players want to do something like this which has a victory point impact, then it's something that can be considered. I also added some special objective cards such as Kill the Enemy CNC, which gives you some benefit, and Sack the Enemy Camp, which gives you some additional benefit as well. I also have a number of special cards which allows a player to swap cards, dispose or draw an extra card. In a card-based system, players would select one card for each of the 9 sets, and then randomly selects 4 cards from the resulting set. If your CNC is excellent, you can select 5 cards. If inert, you only select 3 cards. The VP impact is something I need to conduct some play testing on, but that's generally the direction which I feel is the correct general direction, rather than using a points system or a points penalty or a points advantage. As for the actual force mixes, the DBMM point system is used and it remains unchanged or is unchanged. The terrain deployment system is something that is difficult. P17CW, which is the figure game version of the SPI pre-stags game, reproduces entire battles, and that includes the manoeuvring or pre-battle manoeuvring. Thus, the playing area would have to have a lot more terrain than a typical DBMM game. That's a work in progress, but as my main focus is the card system, I'll not provide my current ideas in terms of terrain in this video, but I suspect that this will require a reasonably large playing area. This system allows the player some decision-making capability, which represents the overall plan of the army. Thus, a player may select either of the flank reinforcement cards, standard reinforcement cards, or a force march card from a particular set. Remember, only one card from each set, and there are 9 sets, are actually placed into the deck that you randomly select from. However, even if you do select a particular card from a set, only 4 of the, or possibly 5 cards from the total deck of 9 will be used, so you may not get it. Thus, while a right flank card is placed into the deck for selection, that player may not pick that card when pulling cards. Thus, that particular plan basically goes awry. This adds a random factor to the whole process. Some of the cards are negative, such as inferior sub-general card. A player who could choose the delaying battle. However, this card is a two-edged sword. However, some players may be happy with an inferior subgeneral as it gives them VPs or points for additional troops. In this case, it's VPs, and that's my preferred option. If it was points, the points value could be as high as -75, although I would suggest a value of -25 is more reasonable. Getting play balance correct is a major issue, as some cards could represent a major advantage to a player. This can only be sorted out with play testing. A player could end up with, for example, this card selection. It's now up to the player to correctly coordinate the cards in order to achieve victory. Using the left flank attack to assist in sacking the enemy camp, using the superior subgeneral, would be a good tactic. You could even use the disguise troop card to hide exactly what is coming in from the flank. However, with this card selection, you will be operationally attacking, yet will most likely be defending against superior enemy forces for the first part of the battle. If you fail to hold long enough, your flank attack could have minimal impact. I must admit at this point my playtesting is comparatively minimal, but I see no reason why this particular system would not prove to be highly successful and give me some interesting games. Saying that, there's certainly nothing wrong with the even points, bash that DBMM or most ancient games tend to favour as well. Thus, this concludes episode 63 of my video on game system design, in this case analysing card-based ad hoc scenarios for ancient figure games. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.